Welcome back live. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show, keeping an all-seeing eye of Horus on the secular movement. I am your host, the Deacon of Doubt, Rob Moore. Happy to join you again here on a Sunday at 2 p.m. It is absolutely frigid in Milwaukee, 2 degrees as I approached the studio this morning here in the Grand Avenue Mall downtown. Frozen Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Cooperative Space, newly renamed, formerly Bucket Works. We are above the TJ Maxx on the second floor, right down here at 161 West Wisconsin. Come on by. We appreciate in-studio help with the program every week. You can follow along and ask questions of our guests, or you can remain silent and be impressed. That way. Joining me as always with a chuckle, he is the CFO of our operation. That, of course, stands for Christian Fundamentalist Offender. He's the Imam of Incertitude. Say hi, Brian Edward. What's going on, Brian?
Treating a nosebleed, and I'm amazed about how you can make the banal of where we're located sound so interesting and compelling.
Well, that's what I do, my friend. It's called bullshit.
That is one way to describe it.
We are happy to have, as a guest today, Karen Garst. She is an atheist and a feminist, and she started focusing on her atheism, I think as a lot of people did, in 2014 when the U.S. Supreme Court, or as I like to call it, that barrel of monkeys, issued its decision in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby. Of course, everyone knows that Hobby Lobby does not have to provide certain forms of birth control to their female employees under the Affordable Care Act because they are conservative boobs there and discriminate against a certain segment of our society. And that got her going, apparently. She writes about women's issues and the role religion has and is playing in inhibiting the progress towards full equality. She strongly believes that the time has come for women to be able to openly and freely express their atheist views. Amen. Can we get an amen there? Without shame and ridicule in our society. She has a doctorate, a doctorate of philosophy in philosophy from right down the road here at UW-Madison. Say hi to Country Karen Garst. Hey, Karen. Are you there? Did we lose you?
One second on the audio.
What happened?
Okay, you should hear me now.
There we go. There she is. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Rob. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Good deal. Introduce us to yourself. Tell us how you got going on this, besides the Hobby Lobby decision, and what you're all about.
Well, I have a very eclectic history. I did get a PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and it was a great time. It was the 70s in Madison. I think that says a lot. I was very active in the Teaching Assistants Association and was in Toronto at a convention, and somebody said we're hiring an organizer in Oregon, and I made the move 35 years ago and have never regretted it. It's in the 40s here, guys. Not to rub it in, but a lot of rain.
The rainforest.
Anyway, I did that, and then I was executive director of the Oregon Community College Association, and then the last 13 years I was executive director of the Oregon State Bar. I retired in '08 to my 5 acres in the beautiful country south of Portland, and I had wandered away from religion probably a couple of decades ago, and then the Hobby Lobby decision came along, and I was incensed. Didn't we fight for women's reproductive rights in the 60s? What are we doing this again for? And I thought about all the young women coming up and listened to a lot of the religious rhetoric and decided I needed to do something about it. So I decided to write a book, and because a friend of mine, Peter Boghossian, who wrote A Manual for Atheists, said you have to market right, I hired a marketing guy and did a blog, a YouTube channel, and all that good stuff. And Pitchstone Publishing is going to be publishing my book, Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion, in the fall of 2016. It is about 20-plus women who have written about their personal journeys away from religion.
Fantastic. Tell us the release date again.
Fall of 2016.
Fall of 2016. Women Beyond Belief. Secularism and feminism, a topic of mutual interest. I think it comes up quite a bit in our little society here, as we've only been at this for a couple of years. But it seems to be a divisive topic. There are women and men on both sides of the issue. We tuned into the debate, I think, that you were a part of in December, and unfortunately the link only had your adversary's piece, so we didn't hear your part of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new atheism and feminism. Is sexism a problem in the new atheism?
Well, it's very interesting. I think as I have entered this field, and I didn't join any secular groups when my husband and I left a church, which is a whole nother story. But I have been very welcomed by people. I do have to say that I was able to secure, with Peter's help, a blurb for the book cover from Richard Dawkins. He read the manuscript. He was the first one I got. John Loftus wrote a blurb. So I feel personally that people have been very, very helpful. I know there's been a lot of, I would call them kerfuffles within the new atheist movement, but I think that happens in any social movement. What I was surprised about, however, was how feminism has changed since the 60s. And I have gotten a lot of pushback from certain feminists. And I can just tell you one story. I had written a couple of weeks ago a blog post about we need more secular men. And I had done it with Shanna Babylonia, who's a blogger at myob.com. And I put it on, I reposted it to an atheist feminist group, and I just got a lot of pushback. It was like they don't want men as allies. They don't want to work with men. And I said something like, well, we wouldn't have gotten women's suffrage without men. And somebody said, oh, is she going to bake him a cupcake?
Oh, cool.
And the last comment I got, I probably can't say this on air, but you'll figure out what it is. Just jumping in here, F men. And I thought, wow, times have changed. And then they pushed me off they deleted me from the group. So I've been really surprised about that, because to me, feminism simply means gender equality, and it involves men, involves women, just like the suffrage movement. We work together to better our society.
Right. I think you mentioned one of you in that blog, or it was a different blog post. Why did the word feminism get hijacked? And you cited a study from last year where that 15%, of Americans say, I agree, I describe myself as a feminist. Yet 85% believe in equality of women, which means kind of the name itself has been a bit of a pejorative, yet the concept is well understood and has a lot of uptake. And you kind of
yes,
postulate some reasons.
I totally agree with that. It's been hijacked. I even read Christina Hoff Sommers wrote a book called Who Stole Feminism, describing some of the things that are happening on campus. And I think that's an element of it too. But I notice when I repost my stuff, I just get a lot of comments about the word feminism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which
is a shame to me. I don't know how else you can say it. You can say gender equality, but then what perspective are you coming from? When you say feminism, you're saying, I think we still have a ways to go here. We've made a lot of progress, but we need to keep working on it.
Agreed. And I think it is because of some of the extreme elements tend to hijack the name, and I think that's where you're getting at. Yet it's good to know that 85% believe in the equality of women, and we do have a bit of the ways to go. I'm applauding the distance we have. It's kind of 90 yards. Okay, great. Just 10 more, and we have a touchdown.
Well, it's really amazing because in the United States, it wasn't until 1900 where every single state allowed women to own property. And we have a woman running for president. So, 100 years in culture is really nothing. So I do think we've made a lot of progress, and I think we have a ways to go. I was very pleased when I was applying for jobs to be considered the equal to any man who was hired, and often the runner-up in the positions I did secure were men.
Right. Your blog is really good, and we'll mention the name, is faithlessfeminism.com. Did I get that
Faithless
right?
Feminist.
Faithless Feminist, thank you. I can't pronounce the state of Oregon correctly either. And
that's fine. Just don't pronounce your show, because I have trouble with that first word.
Yes, we're all about tongue twisters here between us, aren't we?
So faithlessfeminist.com. So real quick, where'd you get the name from?
Well, when Peter told me market right, I hired Dennis Lewis from Greenlight Digital, and the first name he suggested for my blog was Godless Grandmother. And I said,
Okay.
I don't think I'm trying to highlight how old I am or that I am a grandmother. Go back to the drawing board. And he came up with Faithless Feminist, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And again, I'm thinking 60s, 70s feminism. That sounds like a great way to attract women who may be thinking of leaving religion, that they would be attracted to that.
Yeah, it's really good. I encourage people to go there to read the blogs to highlight some of the history that you do pull up. There was a lot that I was learning, specifically to the how long it took for the states to get there. Even as a former Catholic, you were talking about Aquinas's position on pieces that I didn't know. So it's really good from a historical perspective. A+.
Well, thank you. One of the things I did was in the last year, I've probably read 100 books. I felt that I needed to understand more about religion. I did attend a Lutheran college, Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and it was very liberal. I mean, the first religion course we had talked about the different oral strains of the Old Testament. Priestly, Elohim, the J strain, and I was fascinated by that. But I think I needed to catch up. So a lot of my posts are a little academic. I do spend quite a bit of time researching them, but I kind of want to use all this information that I've gleaned over the years.
No, yeah, it's really good. I mean, you mentioned Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, which is really the foundation, him and Augustine of all the Catholic theology, defined life at 40 days gestation. Now it's commonly known to be conception. And I think what an interesting turn. I didn't realize that this is something that they wouldn't highlight, of course. But you did, and it's impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, specifically on reproductive rights. We mentioned like the Burwell Hobby Lobby, and let's get back into that. And for maybe people that don't know, and to correct me if I'm wrong, they basically decided that tightly held companies, which meant if a family owns most of the company, this wouldn't apply to like a big stock company like Apple, is allowed to incorporate their religious beliefs into this healthcare. Am I getting it right?
Yes, and I think you need to go back a little because Citizens United, as you know, decided that a corporation was basically a person. So that laid the foundation to say Hobby Lobby, which was a privately held company, was a person. You need to get that threshold first. And then say, as a person, you have religious rights. And so Hobby Lobby said, our religion causes us not to want to provide certain forms of birth control, which they, in their religious views, not medically, but religiously, defined as abortifacients. And there were actually 2 other companies involved in that suit as well. So it's a progression from Citizens United to Hobby Lobby.
Right. So based on religious reasons only, they're allowed to say XYZ is not available here, even though it would be available at any other company that was, say, a stock company or different.
That's correct. Now they kind of did a workaround where the insurance companies, as they do with religious institutions, will go ahead and provide that free of charge, so the employees still get it. But to me, that's, if you want to start a business, if you want to own a corporation, if you want to meet the public, whether it's baking cakes or providing craft materials through Hobby Lobby, you have said, I'm now in the public sphere. And to me, that's where you cross the line. You can't take your private views of religion and bring them in the public sphere where everyone has a right to different views.
Right. And
there was a case in Oregon where a bakery didn't want to bake a cake for a wedding of a same-sex couple.
Yes.
Well, you can't do that. If you want to bake your cakes at home and you want to bake them for friends and decide whom you want to give them to, fine. But once you're on Main Street, that changes. And so to me, that was a big transgression, if you will.
Right. And it seems that if you would substitute black or non-white in there, everyone would say, well, of course you've got to sell a pizza or a cake to a person of color. But, it seems like when it's gay and lesbian now, somehow it's okay to discriminate. I find this puzzling.
Yes, and I do as well.
And atheism too, as we found out with the FFRF's highly visible case against the waitress, and the discount for the folks who pray. So it's it's not just women's issues, who get trampled with this sort of discrimination. It's atheism too. So we're happy to see it working side by side in the case of a Karen Garst. Take us back to the feminism issue in the '60s and the '70s. You got a couple of years on me, I think, but everybody here is younger than I am, and I remember the '70s, and I have to compliment you. If you remember your time in Madison in the '70s, that right there is an accomplishment.
Nice.
But how
I reviewed it before I talked today.
How is feminine more specifically different today than it is back then? You made it sound like maybe there is actually more radical feminists now than there was back then, and I'm not sure that's everyone's perception.
Well, I think if you look at, and I went back and read some of these books that I hadn't read before, and I remember I started out with Betty Friedan, and when she talked about the 50s and, after the war, and these women had been, Rosie the Riveter, and I watched that movie, and a woman said, I just wanted to weld. I just wanted a job welding. And of course, she couldn't get any. It was fine during the war, but now that the men are come back, you need to, to go and have kids, you need to be the housewife, etc. And Betty talked about how isolated these women were in the suburbs. And I really, I felt for that generation who didn't have, they had a taste of that opportunity, and then they had to let go. And when the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of things happening, but I'm reading Gloria Steinem's latest book, and I'm impressed with the diversity of the movement. I mean, she went on tour with an African-American woman, and she recounts those stories. She met with, there was this convention in 1977, and she was asked to get and meet all the different Native American groups and come up with a position. And she says how proud she was of that. So, and Coretta Scott King was involved. So I think there was more diversity, but clearly, a lot of the people like Gloria and Susan Brown Miller are, white, educated, middle-class women. I think when Alice Walker's daughter, Rebecca Walker, got involved, Take Back the Night in the 90s, they did add more intersectionality issues, like how does race and gender play together? And I think that was a very good addition, and I think we have to deal with those issues, but not at the expense of saying we don't need men anymore.
Right. I mean, it seemed like the people that I know that would say I'm an anti-feminist associate feminist with like Andrea Dworkin or Catherine McKinnon, and it doesn't sound like the names that you're bringing up are I think positive feminists. I tend to think McKinnon and Dworkin were very men exclusive.
Yeah, and I have one of my authors, when we try to get 20 people to agree on a title, didn't want the word feminism there. One of them is she doesn't like the word. She thinks it excludes men. And, she points to a lot of issues like, who fights in wars, who's in prison, who gets killed more. So I think gender equality, you can't just look at women. You have to look at the whole scheme. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to do in society. But I think saying we hate all men it's stupid, it's naive, and it's not going to work.
Well, it excludes the countless men who are obvious feminists, and it goes back to people like John Lennon, who came out and called themselves that back in the day, to today, where many of us value and love everybody who wants to throw down with this movement and could care what their gender is.
Exactly, and I'm married, I have a son, and I love both of them in my life.
There you go. And I go back to, it reminds me of my impressions growing up and how shocked I was when I realized that my mother and her mother both were women who naturally deferred to men and would never be considered feminists in any way. Does that problem still exist? Are there still women today who are in their own way?
Oh, I look at Vicki Garrison writing about the Quiverfil movement. Look at the Duggars.
Yes.
Some of my authors grew up in a very fundamentalist religion, and the oppressive nature. The father had all the control. That certainly still exists. I mean, we're talking about the United States. That still exists today.
How do we get to those people? Is it too late? Are they ingrained? Is it just like with religious indoctrination? Is it just the way they think, and we sort of have to wait till they die out, or is there a way to change a segment of female minds?
Well, the reason I wrote the book and I concentrated on women is I want to be there for women who are thinking of leaving. I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense, to try to solicit women who are absolutely love their religion. They love that they're not going to think of changing. And I have friends like that, and I don't talk to them much about the book. So it's really, it takes a spark saying, I kind of question this. I'm not sure this is right. And both with my blog and my book, I want to say, okay, well, read this, read something more, and start on that path. And some of my authors credit, Valerie Tirico's Trusting Doubt, or Marlene Winnell's book, Leaving the Fold, to really helping them see other women. And I want to emphasize that. I think we all look to models. I remember when I was in ninth grade, I did a paper on evolution. And, I think if there would have been an anthropologist or an archaeologist that I saw or could talk to as a woman, I might have been really sparked by that. But when you don't see models, it's harder. So I think having more women speaking up and writing, women can identify with that. Well, if she could do it, I can do it too.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look to the sports world right now, where I think anyone can name a female superstar that's achieved greatness in sports, but you may not be able to say that in some other fields, like gaming, for example. You mentioned you didn't know much about it. You couldn't immediately think of a household name that was a female gamer.
Science, we're still short on women in science.
Yeah, we are. And the more we get, certainly the more we can put in there. Jane Goodall came to mind, but that's the only, I don't know if she's specifically an anthropologist, but we do need more female women in atheism role models everywhere.
Well, and I just might add, one of the things that I read a lot about and researched really came about in the 60s as more women entered archaeology. And you had people like Marie Gimbutas looking at those finds from a woman's perspective. And you see those figurines from the Paleolithic, and most of them are women. And what were they for? What did they use them for? And they're all found in the hearth of the caves. They're not found in the back where the paintings are and the men and the shamans taught about the hunt. And so I think that's really fascinating. And I did a piece that somebody can download. It's a PDF on my blog called From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Female Divine. And I did a lot of research on that. How did monotheism get rid of the feminine? And I really think that's fascinating. It's probably not relevant to a lot of people, but I found it very interesting.
Well, it's certainly relevant to us here at Mythicist Milwaukee. We have had a couple of shows where we've delved into the missing feminine from the religions of the past, and how they were sort of stamped out as time went by to create the patriarchal monotheisms that we're used to today. So we do appreciate it. And where do you fall on that mythicist spectrum? Have you paid any attention to what we do in that regard? Do you think that any of these biblical figures actually existed at all, or is it all myth?
Well, I've read Richard Carrier's book on the historicity of Jesus.
Congratulations.
I plowed through 800 pages.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and whether Jesus was a real person or not. I thought, the first time machine, I want to go back and talk to him and see if he was really there. I do think, the mention of James in Jerusalem and Paul's contact with him, I kind of say maybe there was somebody there, some kind of apocalyptic prophet. In terms of the Old Testament, some of them, sure. Everything from the Babylonian exile forward, I think there's some validation. There's even there's the first reference to Israelites is on an Egyptian stela that Merneptah talked about his victory in 1204 BC. So there's some historic validation of the people in Canaan, but in terms of the first part, no, not at all.
Right, and the patriarchs, people like Moses and Abraham, are dubious at best. And
yes.
I think even the scholarship would believe that those are mythical.
Yes.
You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I want to remind everyone to support our Patreon page to help us continue to produce this fine program. You can give as little or as much as you want per month, per show. They have it set up a few different ways for your convenience. Also, go to the mythicistmilwaukee.com webpage and consider becoming a member. You can join for $8 a month or $75 a year. And you get lots of benefits with that. You can read all about it on the website. Go ahead and do that, please, at mythicistmilwaukee.com. Help us keep bringing great guests like Karen Garst to you every week, as well as another lineup of fantastic projects we got going this year, including the debate series beginning in March with the aforementioned Richard Carrier debating Justin Bass on the actual evidence for the resurrection. Can't wait to hear who thinks there's some evidence for the resurrection. I'm a little bit baffled by what could possibly be on that side of the argument, but there you have it.
Yes.
The headliner in October, Robert Price and Bart Ehrman, the long-awaited debate on the historicity of Jesus. Go ahead, Brian.
Right. Now, I was going to say fair and balanced, not Fox News style fair and balanced, but actually fair and balanced.
Well said.
Specifically, Karen, you were mentioning the removal of the goddesses, and you mentioned specifically Demeter and how there were powerful women influences. Could you speak to some of that, how there really were the goddesses and women of godly power, as opposed to the kind of the current view that it's all male?
Yes, I would be happy to. I think it's pretty clear that there, when we started out, in Paleolithic, the fact that a woman had a child and continued with the tribe must have been just awesome. And there's a lot of those figurines that relate to the cycles of the earth and the similarity. I mean, can you imagine how interesting it must have been to see that the woman's cycles match the moon cycles?
Right.
that Mother Earth goddess. But if you look at, particularly on Cyprus, even in the Bronze Age, there are women. There's women on thrones. And certainly in both the Greek and Roman pantheon, there were goddesses. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a patriarchy, but at least they were there. And I think what's fascinating is when the first, let's say, 500 years of the Jewish religion, they're constantly fighting Asherah, which was a goddess in Canaan where they were living. And I wrote a blog post about this. And of course, I've read about it elsewhere. I'm not going to take original idea. But if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, you have all the symbols of the goddess. Mm-hmm. Because Asherah was worshipped in the trees. And Asherah can mean either the goddess or a pole. Or it can mean a tree. And so you've got in the Garden Eden the tree of knowledge. And then another symbol for the goddess was a snake. And the word, the symbol, the hieroglyph in Egypt for goddess is a cobra. Mm-hmm. And so what do you have in the Garden of Eden? You have a snake. And I have a picture of a Sumerian tablet with a man and a woman, both on thrones, with a tree in the middle and a snake. And a snake also later became associated with not only the goddess, but healing. And today we still have the caduceus that has a snake around it. If you ask the doctor, where did that come from, they probably wouldn't have a clue. So that's fascinating, I think, of fighting. What better way to fight the goddess than by using the snake as a symbol and having the snake be evil?
Right.
The other element I think that's interesting is the Israelites were clearly in Babylon. This is an historical event. They were taken away by the Babylonians when they were consort, and they took away the elite in 586 BC and then a couple subsequent times. And so they learned, if they didn't know before, this Babylonian myth. And Marduk is one of many gods. And then Tiamat is a goddess. And so Marduk in the story says to the others, he said, look, if you make me head god, I'll get rid of Tiamat. And what does he do? He kills Tiamat. He slices her. She's kind of this Leviathan, this sea creature, and makes heaven and earth. So you can see how these ideas get transposed and incorporated, and to me, it's just fascinating. And monotheism follows the same thing. You get rid of the goddess.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And you mentioned, like in the polytheistic, the Greek system, how Demeter is very powerful, the goddess of the harvest. In fact, I believe her daughter, and I think that was Persephone, was supposed to marry Hades, and she was not happy about this. And they finally hashed out like a treaty with Zeus, and she said, okay, fine. They split the time, 6 months with the mom,
the old
6
pomegranate
months
seeds.
with the husband. But what she was going to do is, well, that'll make me mad for 6 months. So for 6 months, no crops will grow, and that's the theory of winter. And I thought, wow, okay, that's your presence being felt if you're going to take half the time, and that's a check and balance on old Zeus there.
A woman scorned.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a powerful woman.
Yeah, I think Demeter was one of the more powerful goddesses. I think it's interesting, and this grain goddess theme, follows through. There's a story about a grain goddess where she's escaping these men, and she goes to the man in the field and says, if they come, tell them that I was here when the seeds were sown. And the guy says, okay, fine. And then the minute she leaves, the crops grow. So that when the men come, he can honestly say she was here when the seeds were planted. And then that gets incorporated in Christianity, and it's Jesus. So you take all of these myths and you modify them a little, and they become part of the new religion. And that's what culture does. That's how culture reproduces itself. It borrows and steals.
And, of course, the Grain Goddess series still atop the Board of Trade building in Chicago, famously, for those who know their trivia. So, again, here we see the missing goddess from religion, but persisting in culture. So it's nice to see that we haven't lost it altogether.
Right. Is Asherah, can you tell us, was she the consort of Yahweh? Like, you're obviously very well read. I mean, was she kind of the check and balance, or worshipped in tandem?
Well, that's really interesting. There is this big pottery vase that was found, and it says in Israel, Yahweh and his Asherah. And so there are some people saying, oh, well, maybe Asherah was with Yahweh early on. And of course, people dispute that, and I don't think we'll ever get a final solution. But my guess is they were all kind of together. And there was a lot of back and forth, and it really wasn't until the exile where monotheism was pretty well in place. I think Karen Armstrong says, when they came back to Israel, they really had true monotheism. So I think it's very likely that there was a pantheon. And, if you read the Old Testament, you talk about the heavenly court. It's not just one God. They're angels. There's people with more powers. God is a part of all of that. So even in what we have from the Bible, it's not clearly monotheistic totally.
No, God is jealous of other gods. Why would he need to tell you to worship only him if he didn't think there was other gods that you were worshiping? So it's
exactly.
It also seems like there's a human motive for this. I mean, what really holds a peace treaty together is when the cultures become more similar. I mean, take World War II in America and Japan, for example. I mean, Japan, after their defeat, absorbed much of our culture. Now they're considered great allies when we were huge enemies. I can imagine that the Jewish people back then, in order to solidify a peace treaty with Babylon, would incorporate. And now, yes, you're going to get autonomy because, we're good now. And it seems to me like absorbing and changing your culture to somewhat of the conquerors, that helps, that creates peace. And that, to me, sounds like a very human motivation for a lot of this.
Yes, excellent analysis. I totally agree.
It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. We're talking to Karen Garst. She has authored a new book coming out soon called Women Beyond Belief. You're going to fill in the rest of the title for me. Do you got a cut for us? A little clip clip you want to read?
Only because I've repeated it so many times. Discovering Life Without Religion.
There you go. Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. Do you got a little clip you want to read for us?
Yes, I would be happy to.
Please do.
I'll read a couple of them, and then you can react after I read each one. The first one is Anna, who was born in Texas and eventually joined the Mormon Church. She says, as a kid, I didn't learn much about religion, and I don't remember ever praying together as a family. There must have been some praying, at least for a little while anyway. My parents had given up on going to church shortly after my oldest brother was born. My mom wanted to join the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, but my dad at that time wouldn't hear of it. He was the man. He had the ultimate authority. From what my mother told me, he was an oppressive, controlling, proud Irish Catholic who was overly ambitious and demoralizing. Keep in mind, I only have my mother's side of the story to go on because my father was murdered when I was 8.
Wow.
Oh. Wasn't expecting that twist.
And Anna goes on and tells her story of she ended up marrying a Mormon, and one of the things he said before they were divorced was, "Why can't you just submit?"
Wow.
Well, why can't you just conform? It seems like I'm hearing that as a subtext as well.
Exactly. And here's one from Marcia. She spent much of her married life in Colorado, but she was born in Texas. Two in a row with Texas. And thus began the life that had been brought about by a convergence of coincidences. Born in a conservative place, at a conservative time in history, and to conservative parents. Other than outright rebellion, there would have been no way for me to escape this childhood and young adulthood. I was the oldest child and tended toward pleasing the adults who rigidly controlled my life. Pleasing others was my coping survival technique. By being punitive and controlling every aspect of my life, my father very effectively squelched any rebellious thoughts I might have. He spanked, hit me, for minor infractions like crying, talking back, failure to do chores properly, from the time I was only months old until I graduated from high school. When I was about 8, he punished me for sniffling and rubbing my nose. I had untreated allergies, by painting a circle of mercurochrome on the tip of my nose and making me go to school that way. I went to high school PE classes with bruises on my legs that we would now report to some authorities. He had absolute control.
Wow, I gotta imagine. Yeah, it's sent to a grade school with something on your nose. That's absurd. Wow.
So the book is a compilation of different women's stories out of religion, or are some of them still mired in religion, or have all of them escaped?
No. I think there was another book written about kind of leaving extreme religions, but as I talked to the editor of that book, they weren't all atheists. And so I don't think it got spread out much in the atheist community. And the word atheist, I probably have a couple authors who wouldn't use that word. They might say agnostic, or they might say they're spiritual, etc. But they're all comfortable with what I'm doing, is saying basically these women have left religion. I also have 3 authors who grew up in Europe who live in the United States now, and they tell, a really different picture. Some of them were pretty much raised secular. One of them, a friend of mine who's British, they said Grace at lunch, and she couldn't figure out who Grace was. Where was that girl?
Never there.
Why doesn't she show up? Why are we talking about her when she's not even here?
I'd heard you mention an excerpt, and I'm not sure if you kept it in the book, about a woman, I can't remember the name, who was in Jehovah's Witness as well. Did you include?
You want to hear a little bit of that one?
I do.
Okay. Let's see.
We love a good story about the J-Dub.
This person was raised in a devout Jehovah's Witness family. This is going to be a little longer to get into it, but if that's okay, I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
You must consider him a tool of Satan. My face refused to remain neutral as my ears took in this sentence. Did I hear him right? With an expression of incredulity and confusion, I looked back at the elder who had just spoken and the 2 others on the panel with him and replied, I don't see how that's possible. I don't think you understand. I love him. This isn't just a crush. I love him. I wouldn't be with just anybody. Jehovah is a God of love, and this is love, so I don't see how that is even remotely connected to Satan. Satan is using him to draw you away from Jehovah and is disguising himself as this boy. Another elder chimed in. Oh, silly young seal. You hadn't realized that you'd fallen in love with the devil. The fluorescent lights became unbearably bright as I felt my body stiffen, preparing for my reply. I stood my ground and continued to refute their offensive correlation of my love with the devil. Trying to reason and explain my logical feelings, as opposing as that sounds, to this tribunal of elders was futile, though. In this church, females were not given equal voice and stature. Therefore, for me to come into this room prepared for anything but groveling for forgiveness was tantamount to disrespect. I had naively presumed they would treat me with the respect and openness that I had been raised to believe I deserved. And the heat of that moment, I did not recognize the danger I was in by voicing my thoughts. After a solid 2 hours of back and forth, they left the room for an agonizing 90 minutes to deliberate, during which time I sat alone in the back room of the Kingdom Hall, feeling confused, abandoned, and pissed.
Wow.
Right. I mean, this sounds more like Stalin's courts than it does religion. That's very compelling.
Well, we're nothing here if not tools of Satan.
Right.
Well, and she
How
tells
do
the
you know?
story of finding out later on that at the time, one of those elders was having an affair outside of marriage.
Oh, the
Bit
hypocrisy.
of a hypocrite there.
Isn't that
Yep,
where it goes
yep.
on? Churches are always a hotbed of adultery and all sorts of mischievous.
Right. I mean, it's
Hypocrisy.
one thing to do it, right, but it's worse if you are leading the charge to condemn it. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but you're right. Hypocrites, they deserve more shame.
True. I want to remind everyone to go to iTunes and Stitcher now to find the archives of this fine program, The Mythicist Milwaukee Show. Give us a 5-star review. We are trying to boost our presence out there, and it's going to be really important as we go forward. Everybody who listens, please. It's on iTunes now. It's on Stitcher. If you're a young hipster, go and work your way around the dial and rate us, please, highly on YouTube as well. We've also teamed up with King's Tower Productions, as most of you know, to bring you a satirical comedic miniseries, Holy Shit, which is on the YouTube page. A little bit more controversial, a little bit more inflammatory, perhaps, than the high-minded, research-oriented podcast that we do. It's a satirical look at the Bible. Holy Shit, from King's Tower Productions and Mythicist Milwaukee. Go check that out. It's time at 2:42 for a little segment we like to call Myth of the Day. Here with the Myth of the Day is our own Mythmeister, Antonio. Take it away, Antonio, with Myth of the Day.
And thank you so much, Karen, for being here with us today. I would like to first begin by thanking those individuals that have retweeted your appearance on today's show. Thank you to Godless Engineer. Thank you to Kryptonian Atheist. Thank you to Kraft. Thank you to Outlying Perspective. Thank you to Dr. Richard Carrier. Thank you to Helmo. Thank you to Miguel Connor, Steve Shives, and all the other names that have retweeted. Those are some of the bigger, more influential names in the world of secularism and atheism. Thank you to Wes Snow for helping us with the references that we will present right now regarding Martin Luther King's quotes, relating them to Mithraism as we approach Dr. Luther King Day. When Mithraism is compared to Christianity, there are surprisingly many points of similarity. All of the mystery cults, Mithraism was the greatest competitor of Christianity. That Christians did copy and borrow from Mithraism cannot be denied. Mithraism was suppressed by the Christians sometime in the latter part of the 4th century AD, but its collapse seems to have been due to the fact that by that time many of his doctrines had been adopted by the church, so that it was practically absorbed by its rival. The church was made a sacred day out of Sunday partially because of the resurrection, but when we observe a little further, we find that as a solar festival, Sunday was a sacred day of Mithra. It was also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed as Lord, Sunday must have been the Lord's day long before Christian use. And our last Martin Luther King Day Jr. quote, "It is also to be noticed that our Christmas, December 25th, was the birthday of Mithra, and was only taken over in the 4th century as the date, actually unknown, of the birth of Jesus. Both Christianity and Mithraism regard Sunday as a holy day. December 25th came to be considered as the anniversary of the birth of Mithra and Christ. Also, baptism and ritual meal were important parts of both groups, and that is our myth of the day."
Thank you, Antonio. Is it Martin Luther King quotes about Mithraism? That's fascinating, and something that we've lost over the years. is that that willingness to look at the Bible as a metaphor from front to back, which I grew up with as a young Protestant. And I've said many times, Karen, what do you make of the rise in fundamentalism that seems to accompany the rise in secularism in America and the young earth creationism?
Well, young earth creationism, I am really appalled that we have a presidential candidate who believes the world was created in 4004 BC because Bishop Ussher in the 16th century or 14th century had calculated from the genealogies. I was in that evolution class in the 60s, and nobody walked out. We didn't have any question about it. Abby Hafer has a really interesting book called The Not So Intelligent Design. And, that intelligent design is fairly recent. And I can tell you as a mother, it's not so intelligently designed. When we started to walk upright, we had to have narrow pelvises, and then we grew this big brain. And let me tell you, that doesn't come together so easily when you're trying to deliver a baby.
Come apart.
It's true.
Yeah. But I think the conservative issue, the fundamentalist, I think a lot of that is political. I think if you look back at the 40s and FDR, a lot of corporations didn't like where it was going, and they didn't like the social services program, and they teamed up with people like Billy Graham. They worked with President Eisenhower to, insert under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, and came together and saw it was successful politically. And I think that's true. The post I did on abortion. If you look at the 70s, Richard Nixon had signed a bill supporting allowing certain abortions in the Department of Defense at bases. And then he got approached by some strategists who said, hey, look, you want to run against McGovern and you want to get rid of Muskie, and the Catholics are anti-abortion. So if you become anti-abortion, you can get some of those away. And so it was a political strategy, I think, more than anything else. And I read when Jerry Falwell was recruited to head and participate in the moral majority, he couldn't even spell the word abortion.
Right. You mentioned this on your blog, too, and I thought this was fascinating. It was another piece that I learned that Richard Nixon initially was pro-choice, and you go farther to mention a 72 Gallup poll where 68% of Republicans and 59%, so actually more Republicans than Democrats, were pro-choice. So a majority of both parties are pro-choice at that point. That's fascinating.
Isn't it? Yes.
I miss the 70s every day, Brian.
But yeah, it does make sense. I'm more and more agreeing with your assertion that religion had found its way politically, because maybe these political statements were more boring. So infuse them into religion, which everybody seems to like, and you'll get the uptake that you want.
I love her answer on that, because we ask it of every guest, and I think you're the first one, Karen, to really put it down to politics. I hadn't seen it from that perspective myself. As a part of the puzzle, yes. Yeah. But really, laying the blame at the doorstep.
Well, and there was an interesting Senate race in Iowa in the 70s that showed the same thing. There was a Democrat running. They thought he was going to win, and a whole bunch of the churches the Catholics leafleted the churches against him, and he lost. And I think that was really pivotal to saying this can be a wedge strategy. This can be an issue. And, back to that issue of intelligent design, the creationist movement saw Abby Hafer talks about it in her book, where they had this document called the wedge strategy. And it was, they kind of had to back away a little bit because it went public, and it was, we can create a wedge. We can use this issue, if you will. And that happens very often.
Yeah, I definitely encourage our listeners to check out her blog at faithlessfeminist.com. It's really excellent. It's well-researched. You're incredibly well-read. And I think Gandhi said, or attributable to Gandhi, to be the change that you want to see. We have looked at the stats. There's 75% of men kind of in the small atheist community, maybe 25% women. How do we increase that? How do we change those numbers to a more even keel?
Well, that's a great segue, because I wanted to mention I was at the Freedom from Religion Foundation convention in Madison, and somebody walked up to me and said, "You're Karen Garst," and I said, "Yes." Well, I actually knew him. He was a former legislator, a lawyer, Charles Ringo, and we sat and talked about what we needed to do. And we came back to Portland. He lives in Bend, which isn't too far from here, and we have created an event called the Atheist Festival. It's going to be in Pioneer Courthouse Square in Portland on May 26th, and it's going to be fun. It's called an Atheist Festival, a celebration for life. We want to make it comfortable for people to say they're atheists. And we're going to have booths, we're going to have music. And so I think the first thing is, if you're an atheist, use the word. David Silberman, in his recent book, Fighting God, talks about if people would just say they were an atheist, there'd be a lot more of us. And he estimates that maybe 30% of the U.S. population is really atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to feel comfortable saying it. And then I will say one other thing. I met with... well, let me back up a little. My husband, who's been very supportive, noticed an article in the Oregonian about the Jesus Seminar on the Road doing a seminar at a local church. And we went, and it was odd to be in a church after a couple decades. And they were talking about what do we do with religion when there's no God. And I ended up having lunch with this pastor who basically is an atheist pastor.
Okay.
And half the church doesn't, somebody told me half the church doesn't believe in God. And I'm going to work with him if he gets board approval to do a survey of that congregation and talk about what is it that makes you stay if you don't believe in God. So there's a lot of things happening out there, and this Atheist Festival, we're going to have a Facebook page. Would love you to replicate it. We'll give all our materials. We'll show you what we've done, and just come out. It worked for the gay rights movement. It'll work for us.
Boy, you really said it there. This is the new civil rights movement, isn't it?
Yes.
Good deal. I want to get to Oregon. It's one of the few states I have not been to. And so that sounds like a great reason to go. Oregon, the land of festivals. I think people think of it that way a lot. So what a better name? What better name than Atheist Festival? I love it. And I'm in complete agreement on coming out as atheists and calling ourselves atheists. Of course, our buddy Dave is a little optimistic. I'm not sure it's 30%, but I think it's probably a good 20 at least. And we hope that keeps on growing. Talk to us about Oregon. We being from New England myself, I always think of the Pacific Northwest as the other liberal bastion in the United States. But there's clearly still fundamentalism there. Do you? Is it a problem? Is there still some backlash against an atheism in the Northwest?
I don't think so. We talked about our event, what we needed to do, and Oregon is pretty laid back. It's probably the most liberal state. It's absolutely beautiful. We do get a lot of rain, but that makes everything green. And coming from the Midwest, to me, I couldn't complain about the rain for about 20 years because I was so happy there wasn't snow.
Your doorknob wasn't frozen
but
on the inside.
It's a great place. We like to keep Portland weird, and I think we're doing a pretty good job.
Keep Portland weird, right? I saw that on Portlandia. There's a blurb about that. Is that real? So that's real? Is there a keep Portland weird? Is that a thing?
That's a little theme of ours. Okay. Yes.
All right.
But we're also, we're very good for business startups. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs who come here, who work together, a lot of shared spaces. It's a great place to be for business too. I'll put in a plug for that.
Okay.
Good deal. Are you headed to the Reason Rally in Washington?
Well, I did ask to speak.
Yes.
I'm not sure I could justify going across country, and I don't think it's probably likely that I'll get to speak. But if I do, I'll be there.
Oh God, that'll be a disappointment. I would love to see you on there. Your blog was incredible. You're super smart.
You've made my day. You've probably made my week, both of you. Thank you so much.
Is there anything more that we can do to attract more women to atheism? Is there as secular men, what running an organization, we have some women, again, ours is about 25%, and anything that's a good strategy?
I think we need to speak out more. I was disappointed when I started binge watching debates on YouTube that there weren't more women. There's a few, and I reached out to some women who are active in organizations, secular organizations. And I said, if you know some woman, give me her name. I'll call her and I'll really encourage her to debate. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Annie Laurie Gaylor from FFRF told me, gee, when people call, they ask for Dan. And Louise Anthony did a debate. But they've got other careers, and I really don't know, why more women don't feel comfortable debating. But when you had mentioned Bernie Deller, when he and I reached out, we reached out to every person who was a woman who taught religion in the state and said, conversation doesn't have to be a debate. We just like to talk about women and Christianity. And here's your chance. We'll put it on YouTube. And we couldn't get a single woman to debate us.
Wow. Well, I thought I was going to say, what an excellent idea. And wow, and it didn't pan out as far as getting their interest.
Well, you're doing your part too, Karen. I've noticed that you cleverly mentioned about 50 female authors in your discourse today, which is well thought through. There's millions of atheist authors, and you've managed to slip in a bunch of women authors, and it's clever and appreciated. So around here, of course, if it was up to me, every person who came through the door would be a woman. I much prefer the company of women to men. So I'm not sure what the issue is really. And of course,
and I think I am hopeful that people like you who mention the blog will mention it to women. They'll get on it, they'll see it, and then you can always buy the book and give it to a friend who's a woman.
Great idea.
That is a good idea.
It occurs to me that there might be women out there who are, and I shouldn't put anything into this question. Just to answer the question, I'll try to be even-handed with it. Does it harm women in the movement for women who are to use their attractiveness on YouTube to sell what the message? Does it go against the feminism that we're trying to work towards equality?
Oh, I don't know. At 65, I've kind of given up on that issue. I'll tell you a cute story. I went to this Trinity Lutheran Church in Bismarck, and I thought it would be a good strategy to get this guy to ask me to prom by beating him at all the Bible verses.
There you go.
So, socially, I wasn't really adept.
Well, hey, smart is sexy. But I think you're right. I mean, promoting some of the women authors seem to be less known. So you're right. I think if being the change you want to be, helping promote this, that's what we can do. And you can't drag people kicking and screaming to your event. They've got to come.
Exactly.
We just got a couple of minutes left. You've been listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee show. And speaking of self-promotion, we want to make sure we mention our Facebook page, our Twitter. We're on Pinterest. We're on Tumblr. We're on StumbleUpon. We are on Reddit. We are wherever. We have a meetup, meetup.com page called Milwaukee Atheists, Skeptics, and Humanists, where we host a variety of social engagements for people to enjoy in the Milwaukee area. So make sure you find us on all of those social media and like us and love us. And we just have about 2 minutes left, a little bit less. Karen, you got any last thoughts for us? Something you want to push?
Well, the next time my husband and his friends want to go to a Green Bay Packers game, I'll stop by Milwaukee and see you. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And anything I can do for you, I will do. I think you've got a great show, and thanks for reaching out.
No, thank you so much, and great luck to you with the book and all of your efforts. You're really you're doing a great service for the movement and for your gender, my friend. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it was our pleasure to have you on. You've taught me plenty of things, and I do appreciate learning. You're just a fantastic example and good role model. So keep it going.
Stay on the line afterwards, Karen. We are almost done. I want to remind everyone to join in next week, January 24th at 2 p.m. for a special live in-studio guest. We are very honored to have SNAP's Peter Isley. It's the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. He is a local guy. At least right now, he's going to join us with a headphone and a microphone right here in the studio next week. A very special episode of the Milwaukee Mythicist Milwaukee show. Be sure to join us.
I'll have to shower
for that. You will have to shower for that. Yeah, so you can't just come in your underwear like you usually do. So Yes, join us on January 24th next week for Snaps. Peter Isley, and that is all we got. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.